Richard, Otto, and Trudi were there, crouched at the edge of the clearing, hiding behind the bushes, when they heard the voices. Men were getting closer and closer, and finally the men came through into the clearing, and you'll never guess who it was. And I'll tell you the rest of the story tomorrow. Oh, sorry. And sure enough, right there in front of them was Uncle Sigmund and Thor Jansen, Richard's father. And they came out into the clearing and they started talking. And Sigmund was asking his brother Thor questions and said, "Are you sure you're ready?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And they walked into the stream. And Sigmund looked at Thor and he said, "Are you ready to renounce your sins and begin a new life in Jesus?" And he said, "Yes, I'm ready to begin that new life." And he said, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." And right then and there, they saw their father get baptized. Came up out of the water, and they left. Richard, Otto, and Trudi looked at each other, and they said, "We need to get out of here." And they snuck back home. Nobody talked about the baptism. What do you say? I mean, yeah, they talked amongst each other on the way home, of course, but they didn't talk to their parents about it. They didn't talk to their neighbors about it. But as they talked with each other, they said, "Man, that was pretty cool, wasn't it?" Yeah. Trudi looked at Richard and said, "Would you ever get baptized?" "Oh, I don't know." "How about you, Otto?" Otto said, yeah, I'll probably get baptized someday. When? They said, I don't know. Like, how do you know when you're ready? Oh, that's tricky. Well, I guess you just know. But how? Well, he said, when I am absolutely sure that it's God leading this, I'll get baptized. Richard said, I'll get baptized when Otto does. And Trudi just looked at him like he was the silliest boy ever. And she said, that's not how it works. You need to know yourself. He said, oh yeah, no, I will. Things did not get less tense at home. They were still waiting, wondering what was going to happen. Was the committee coming? When were they coming? One day, Uncle Sigmund and Father Thor went out into the field to work together. And all of a sudden, there was a pounding at the door. Not a gentle knock of like, hey guys, anybody home? But a pounding. They realized this must be the committee. Immediately they said, oh no, what are we going to do? There was one problem they had. One problem that wasn't easy to take care of. What were they going to do with the baby? They had to decide quick. Richard said, I know what we can do. We can hide the baby in the basket outside like baby Moses. That's a good idea. And so just as they were opening the front door, Aunt Bertha rushed out the back with the baby. She hid him outside. Sure enough, the guards came in. They looked everywhere. It was like they were looking for something in particular. What are you looking for? Mother asked. We're looking for a baby. Why would you think we have a baby here? Mother was very careful not to tell any lies. They said, oh, we heard reports that there was a baby here. Oh, is there a baby on the records? No, but maybe it's a relative's baby. Oh, are there records that our relatives have a baby? No. Finally, Mother looked at and said, would you like to wait until Thor gets home? You have to understand, Thor was a big guy. He was a hard-working farming guy. You didn't mess with Thor. Oh, he didn't have much of a temper, and almost no one had ever seen him upset. But this was the type of guy you didn't want to get upset. He was a big guy. And so immediately everybody on the committee said, no, I think everything's fine here. And they immediately left the house. They brought the baby in, and wouldn't you know it, the baby had not made a peep the entire time it was hiding outside. God clearly had been protecting them, hadn't he? And they asked Richard, where in the world did you come up with that idea so fast? He said, I don't know. I must have gotten it from God. Now, it was the plowing time of season. And so, every year at this time, all the neighbors would get together and they would go out and plow the fields. And they wouldn't just plow their fields because, you see, not everybody had enough oxen to plow their own field. And so they would all work together, and neighbors would help neighbors, and they would take turns plowing one field at a time, all of them working together to get it done. And it was a long day. Otto said, hey, I know that everybody's going to be out there in the whole community. Nobody's going to notice one extra boy. And so finally they said, okay. So both Richard and Otto went out to help with the plowing. And they plowed field after field. It was a long, long day. Oh, they were tired. And finally, towards the end of the day, it was time to plow the Jansen's field. Finally, they were excited to get their own field done. And all of a sudden, one of the workmen came up to Thor and he said, Thor, I am so sorry. I would love to help you plow, but I think I hurt my back. I don't know how I did this. It may have been in the last field. It may have been, but I'm going to have to go home. He said, of course. Go home. As soon as he turned around to leave, someone else came up and said, hey, I just got word. My wife is not feeling good. And you know how wives are. I better go home and take care of her. Oh, yeah, no, of course. Go for it. Then the next person came up and said, hey, you know how I have all those geese? Yeah, I know that you have geese. Yeah, I don't know what is going on with the geese right now. They're a little bit crazy. I'm going to go home and just make sure they're okay. Okay. Started thinking something might be going on. And so Thor said, is there something going on? Because those weren't the only ones. People kept coming up and giving excuses, reasons why. And he said, what's going on? Why don't you guys want to help? And finally somebody just looked at him and said, you can never be too careful. And pretty soon, the only people that were left were three people: Thor, Richard, and Otto. And they had to plow their own field all by themselves. And they were plowing, and they were exhausted. And just as they were finished, out of the woods came some men. It was the overseer from the Prince Bishops. What was he doing here? And just as he was walking towards them, someone else came running. It was Hugo Schwartz. And Hugo Schwartz was mad. And Hugo Schwartz was about to talk to Thor when all of a sudden the overseer said, who are you? He said, Hugo Schwartz. The overseer said, I've been looking for you. You need to stop doing what you're doing. And Hugo said, no, you don't understand. I'm working for the church. I'm taking care of the heretics. The overseer just gave him one of those looks that said, stop. And he kept talking, and two guards stepped in and they had their pikes, and they pointed their pikes right at him. He turned around and went home. Why? And then the overseer immediately continued his conversation as though nothing had happened. And he said, we've been looking for you, Mr. Jansen, because you said you wanted to buy some land from the Prince Bishop. Is that correct? Yeah, but that was before. He barely had what it took to plow his own land, and now more land? Oh, this didn't seem like a good time. Well, here's the deal. You can buy land, and we're going to do it the usual way. Tomorrow, you can buy as much land as you are able to plow in one day. Without any help from anyone else, with the oxen already completely exhausted from pushing them harder than we should have today, how is this going to work? But okay, the next day, as soon as the sun came up, maybe even before it came up, they were out and they were plowing and they worked hard and long until the sun had peaked down below land and was completely gone. Exhausted, they trudged back into the house. They hadn't plowed very much. They'd only plowed just a tiny sliver of the land. And so, sure enough, the overseer came back. And he said, oh, it wasn't very much. And they talked about the price. Mr. Jansen handed over the money. The overseer counted it twice. Then for good measure, he counted it one more time. And then he said, now there have been some stories going around about Anabaptists. He said, you need to be careful. Be careful what you're doing. Be careful of these stories. And as he took the money, he handed Father a scroll. And then he turned around and left. Father opened the scroll, and as he read it, his face turned white. He quickly put it away. And anytime anybody even asked about the scroll, the subject was changed. Now, it was time for school to start. But you see, usually the pastor taught school, but the pastor was gone. And so the assistant pastor was going to teach. Richard convinced his parents that Otto should go to school with him too. And so the two boys were excited as they walked off to school. They were talking about the lessons. They were talking about the things they were going to learn. They were wondering, what is this assistant pastor going to be like? Is he going to be as good as the old pastor was? He was a fantastic teacher. And they were excited, as two boys often are, talking, thinking about the possibilities. What was it going to be like? And finally, they arrived at the schoolhouse. This was exciting. And they walked in. They found two seats right at the front where the good students sit. And the lesson started. It wasn't as exciting as they might have hoped. It was a lot of repetition, but that's okay. They were still learning. This was exciting. And all of a sudden, there was a knock at the door. Who was this? Mr. Radicke, the teacher, went over and he opened the door, and there, outside the door, was the housekeeper for the school. And he said, Mr. Radicke, can you come with me? Mr. Radicke said, okay. Went out and came back like a changed man. When he came back, he looked like he had seen a ghost. His face was white. His lips were dry. And he began to sort of mumble and teach, and all of a sudden, Hugo Schwartz's voice boomed across the room. Don't you say another word, he said. You get out of there right now. Mr. Radicke said, children, class is dismissed. And you are not to say or tell anyone what you have seen or heard here. Richard and Otto walked home. And as they walked home, they tried to figure out what in the world is going on. What didn't we see? What aren't we going to talk about? They had no idea what was happening. And one of the other boys who was walking in the same direction used his hands and did a reverse cross. The same symbol that they used when they excommunicated members. Oh, were they going to excommunicate Mr. Radicke, he wondered? Richard didn't think about it too much because there was so much work to do. The days went on, and one day he was out with the cows in the field herding them and not thinking about anything particular when he noticed a lot of people were walking by the house. And he thought, where are all these people going on a day like this? And amongst the people was Trudi. And Trudi said, Richard, come with me. Richard said, where are you going? She said, to church. Well, this didn't make any sense at all. First of all, it was not the day to go to church. And second of all, Remember, the church is closed. We're not allowed to go into the church. Trudi, and she said, no. We're going because there's going to be an excommunication. And my father said, I have to go. He thinks it'll be good for me to see. Richard said, okay. And so he joined the crowds and they all started walking to the church. And as they got closer, he had never in his life seen so many people at church. My goodness, there were people who hadn't come to church in the longest time. People who said they were too sick for church somehow had the energy to show up today. Oh, wow. It was packed jam full. And he and Trudi squeezed in. They found a seat sort of near the front. And they watched with anticipation. The doors in the back opened, and in came a priest and the bishop. And they began doing their chants. All eyes were locked on them, and then they heard chains scraping across the ground. They looked up with anticipation, and the door opened. There was Mr. Renicky. Mr. Renicky held a scroll, and he started reading from it. And as he read, he said, I recant and renounce my views on baptism. I will not continue this heresy. Then he hung his head and turned and walked out. I'm not going to lie. Everyone seemed a little disappointed. It was like they wanted to see someone be excommunicated. But no, he recanted. He was gone. And then the door opened again. And there was someone else. There, in the doorway, his head hung low, a scroll in his hand, was Thor Jansen. He opened up the scroll, and just as he was about to begin to read it, oh man, Richard's heart was completely sunk. He didn't want his father to be excommunicated, but also he didn't want his father to recant or renounce his beliefs. He had watched his father be baptized. He didn't want to see his father do this. He wanted his father to be brave, but at the same time, the idea of seeing his own father excommunicated from the church, he didn't want that either. And for the first time in Richard's life, he prayed a prayer of his own. He prayed that God would strengthen his father and that his father would have the courage to stand up for his beliefs. As he finished his prayer, he realized his arm was hurting pretty bad. And he looked down, and Trudi was squeezing his arm with all her might. But there stood Thor Jansen in the front, with the scroll in front of him, and as he began to read, all of a sudden, it was like someone grabbed him. And he lifted his head up high, and he said, no, I do not recant what I believe. I do not believe that infant baptism is from God. I will not. And before he could even finish his sentence, the guards grabbed him and they covered his mouth. The priest stood up in front of the church and he said, I excommunicate you from this church. You are no longer welcome in this church. Your home is cursed. The ground you walk on is cursed. Your family is cursed. Everything about you is cursed. Your whole life is cursed. And you are bound for destruction in hell. He said, your life will be like this candlestick. And he took a candlestick from there and he threw it on the ground and they watched the light go out. Then, with anger and disgust in his voice, the bishop pointed at the door and he said, get out. father walked out. Richard pushed through the crowd to be with his father. Alongside of him came his mother, and the two of them, they walked out together. Outside the church, their father was waiting, and the three of them walked home, feeling the contempt from the community, from the neighbors, from the church. They slowly walked home, and finally, when they arrived home, wondering what they were going to do, there in front of their home were two soldiers. Thor Jansen looked at the soldiers and he said, "What are you doing here on my property?" They said, "This is no longer your property." "What do you mean this is no longer my property? This has always been my property." "No. This is now the Prince Bishop's property." Mother said, "Can't we go in and get some clothes?" "No. They have ordered anyone who goes into this house or tries to must be put to death on the spot."